Israel's latest missile strike in Doha has sent shockwaves across the Gulf, casting a long shadow over already fragile relations between Tel Aviv and its neighbors. The attack, a blatant violation of Qatar's sovereignty, claimed 6 lives, including a Qatari official, and is being read in the region as proof that Israel now sees no limits to its use of force. For the Gulf states that once gambled on normalization, the strike is more than an outrage. It's actually a warning that Israel's current leadership is willing to upend regional stability in pursuit of a doomed campaign of domination. Meanwhile, Israel's broader war stretching from Gaza to Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, and now Qatar is unraveling the fragile security architecture painstakingly built over decades. Tonight, we ask, has Israel crossed a point of no return, turning allies into targets and diplomacy into collateral damage? And what options remain for Gulf capitals determined to defend their sovereignty and strategic interests? I'm Hala Al-Hamilawi. This is In Focus. Writing in the Financial Times, David Gardner argues that Netanyahu's fixation on erasing Hamas is backfiring spectacularly, leaving behind civilian campaign, diplomatic isolation, and a sense among Gulf leaders that Israel has become a destabilizing aggressor rather than a partner for peace. And Tuesday's missile strike in Doha aimed at Hamas officials but killing a Qatari mediator and civilians shatters the very premise of dialogue. Qatar, which hosted Hamas at Washington's behest and mediated prisoner talks with Israel's approval, is now left exposed. Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, Israel's most important Gulf interlocutors, have denounced the strike as heinous and treacherous. For Netanyahu, this was billed as deterrence, but for the region, it looks like reckless escalation. One that may jeopardize not just normalization, but the fragile balance of power holding the Gulf together. And for more analysis, joining us now from Washington is Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Center, to unpack how Israel's attack on Qatar is reshaping Gulf politics and what it means for regional stability. Thank you so much, Mr. Russell, for joining us on Qnews. It was a pleasure having you. Now, how do you interpret the timing and intention behind Israel's strike in Doha? Was it purely tactical or part of a larger regional posture shift?
Well, first of all, good evening, Hala. Always good to be with you. Well, the only way to describe the Israeli unjustified and unwarranted attack on Qatari sovereignty in Doha the other day was illogical. It makes no sense. You know, from just a grand strategy standpoint, you know, at least the intelligence has shown you that you are trying to take out the people that are trying to look at the proposal put forward by your biggest ally, America, and they're trying to figure out if this is the way forward. And then what you do is, while they're trying to find a road to a peaceful solution, you go and you create this illegal and unjustifiable act. That's illogical. That makes no sense. From a strategic standpoint, it makes no sense because of the fact that now, if you are trying to, if in fact getting your hostages home are a priority, you don't take out the ones that are trying to negotiate getting those hostages back to you. If anything, this has made it more secure that they possibly put the lives of their own people in jeopardy, because there's no reason for them to, to maintain keeping these hostages alive as a negotiation to cessation of hostilities. It was a broadly bad move that has overstepped all kinds of boundaries. and it's biting them in the rear end right now in Tel Aviv.
Mm-hmm. So what message does this send to Gulf states like Qatar, also Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, all of whom have either formal or informal ties with Israel?
Well, I mean, look at the Abrams Accords. I mean, there is every indication that this action, unless there is some big movement, that this action puts Donald Trump's signature Abrams Accords in jeopardy. There's no real reason strategically from a security or a diplomatic standpoint for any of the Gulf states, particularly the UAE, who is directly involved in the Abrams Accord, for them to maintain that relationship and maintain being a party to those accords. It definitely makes Saudi reconsider. It makes MBS very much reconsider the ability for them to start the path forward for diplomatic recognition and normalization. And it completely, the biggest impact is the Qataris. The Qataris from day one have been trying to negotiate along with President al-Sisi and the Egyptian leadership. But as far as, from day one, putting all in as far as being acting in good faith player to try and come up with a peaceful solution, when the U.S. asked the Qatari government to host Hamas as a place that they could have dialogue, Qatar did it. They did it when Trump asked, when Biden asked, when Obama asked, and when Trump asked again to keep them. They did it. They didn't ask questions. Why? Because they are a good partner. When the attack from Israel happened, that completely blew that relationship into jeopardy.
Exactly.
That is a big deal, and it should be a big deal for the U.S.
Yes, it should be. Okay, has Netanyahu effectively torpedoed the Abraham Accords spirit? Is normalization now in retreat?
Absolutely. Our discussions with people both in the region here in Washington, D.C. is that there is the definite concern that the Abrams Accords could be in dire jeopardy. And the bottom line here is there is no reason. Look, you are talking about the Gulf states, which, I mean, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain all did a blockade. They were butting heads. They were at odds with each other just several years ago. And now Benjamin Netanyahu, in one just completely inconceivable act, has brought them all together and solidified the Gulf states in unison. That is a big surprise. If you had told me that was possible, I would have said that's crazy. There's animosity there. And Netanyahu's done the complete opposite. The big thing here is Benjamin Netanyahu has also brought the wrath of the entire global community on them and has managed to alienate them even further from both allies and adversaries. It makes no sense.
Makes no sense. So to what extent does this attack reflect Netanyahu's disregard for diplomacy and multilateral negotiation frameworks? Because, Mr. Russell, you just told me that with this strike, he actually managed to bring former foes together and make them even more united. And it even doesn't make any sense, as you mentioned, because if he has any regards to the safety of the detainees, those people that he attempted to assassinate were there trying to negotiate the deal on a neutral land. So is this disregard for diplomacy and multilateral negotiation frameworks by Netanyahu?
You know what? I can't even begin, Paula, to try and understand the mindset and the mentality of Benjamin Netanyahu in this situation. What I can tell you is that the optics of it say that, all of this discussion, all of the press statements, and all of the talking points that we're here coming out of Tel Aviv are nothing but jazz hands. It's a diplomatic and political kabuki dance, because when they say that, like, look, we are looking to save and protect the Israeli people, This action puts the Israeli people in jeopardy. When he is talking about we are going to defend our right to sovereignty, when you have allies in the region that are recognizing your sovereignty and trying to, bring that to a greater audience and get more neighbors in the Gulf states and in the Arab world to recognize your legitimacy and sovereignty, this action does the exact reverse of that. And what we're seeing now, quite frankly, Hala, is the fact that we saw it today earlier when the UN just voted on a resolution a few hours ago condemning the Israeli attack on Doha. The big talking point here is the U.S. voted in favor of it. This never would have happened before this. This never would have happened until today. And that should be a clear signal to Tel Aviv, you have crossed a line that even your biggest ally says is out of bounds.
Okay. Well, speaking of that in particular, speaking of Israel's biggest ally, the United States, how is the United States, particularly under Trump's current term, navigating this rupture? Is Washington's credibility in the region now eroding?
Hala, you and I have spoken many times on this network, and you know I'm not a huge fan of the Trump administration's policy on this.
Yes. The reason I'm asking that, Mr. Russell, is because Trump has been, and he's a clear supporter of Netanyahu's actions in the region, no matter what happens. That's why I'm asking this question. You're the best to answer.
And it's a really good question, Hala. That's the thing is, the crux of what's happening is, and this is where the Trump administration has painted itself into a corner. On one hand, the U.S. government's position has been that, supporting Israel and its right to defend itself and its right to protect its sovereignty and its citizens is non-negotiable. They painted into a corner this time because when Benjamin Netanyahu decided to launch a preemptive, unjustified attack on the sovereign soil of Doha into a civilian neighborhood and hitting civilian and hitting Qatari nationals and the loss of innocent Qatari national lives, that crossed a big line. And what has happened is Donald Trump has to balance the fact of where do we go from here? My understanding is that even though there have been public statements saying that any sort of tension between Washington and Doha is not true, it's been played out in the American. My understanding is that there is a deep anger out of Doha against the U.S. For both. Basically what it is we work with you. You are supposed to be our strategic partner. And that when you do something like bomb Iran or you green light an attack by Israel, it affects us. They're not attacking the U.S. They're attacking sovereign Qatari soil. We are doing this because
the U.S. as well. And the U.S. as well, Mr. Russell, because we shouldn't forget that the United States has the biggest military base in the Gulf region, Al Udeid. So what impact could this have on U.S. strategic military positioning in the region, particularly with bases in Qatar and Bahrain as well?
Look, remember that when Trump decided to condemn the Biden withdrawal, when Trump first negotiated the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that plan was to have over-the-horizon capabilities by the U.S. and allied forces. That over-the-horizon capability from an air and strategic standpoint was always going to be Al Udeid Air Base in Doha. That is the largest base in the U.S. arsenal. It is a key component for Central Command. It is a key component for DOD and for NATO allies that are based in that Central Command AOR. When you sit there and you greenlight an attack and that attack happens, look, I've spent a lot of time in Doha. The area where this the area where this attack was held was basically a diplomatic, it's like Embassy Row here in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of diplomatic housing. There's a lot of embassies in that area.
Mm-hmm.
This could have been even worse if they had missed by just a fraction. But the biggest point I'm trying to make here is that neighborhood where the attack happened is only maybe 6 or 7 miles away from Al Udeid Air Base.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about allowing this to happen within miles of your biggest strategic on the sovereign soil of your partner there. Mm-hmm. That has put the U.S. military, the U.S. strategy, and the U.S. diplomatic credibility in great danger right now in the region, particularly with our best friend, the Qataris.
Okay. My final question to you, sir. Now, does this shift present an opportunity for regional realignment, perhaps drawing Gulf states closer to China, Turkey, perhaps Russia?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, if I can promise you that the ambassador from China, the ambassador from Russia, the ambassadors from all of the BRICS alliance nations have gone to the palace in Doha to talk to the Emiri staff and talk to, and not just in Doha, I guarantee that the same dialogue is happening in Riyadh, it's happening in Abu Dhabi, it is happening in Oman. I can tell you right now, what's happening is they are going in saying, hey, you know what? Your best buds, you can't trust your best friends. You can't trust your American partners anymore because they can't even protect you. And they can't even swear off or stop an attack on your sovereignty from happening. You know what would happen if we were your friend? We would never allow that to happen. We would actively stop. And of course, if you are the emir or the head of state in any of the Gulf states, let alone any partner state in the region, they would sit there and say, you know what, you're right. You know what, you want a spot at Al Udeid, you want a spot at Riyadh, you want a spot here and talking to us and be our strategic partner? Let's talk. That's an economic incentive. That's a trade incentive.
Yes.
This was a big blowback for both Netanyahu and possibly for the U.S.
Exactly. Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, always a pleasure talking with you, and I'd like to thank you so much for that comprehensive analysis. Thank you so much. And Israel's military calculus faces new diplomatic consequences. Now the Gulf strategic patience appears to be wearing thin. From Qatar to Yemen, from Lebanon to Iran, Israel's campaign now spans nearly every corner of the Middle East. What began as a war against Hamas has actually gotten broader into a cross-border offensive, challenging international law and threatening to plunge the region into unconscionable conflict. In our next segment, we will examine this dangerous trajectory and whether Israel's doctrine of deterrence everywhere is in fact accelerating its own strategic isolation. Stay tuned. As Foreign Policy reports, Israel's war is no longer confined to Gaza. Since October 7th, its operations have struck Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, the occupied West Bank, and now Qatar. From assassinations in Beirut to airstrikes in Sana'a and Doha, this is a campaign increasingly untethered from accountability, conducted with a confidence that U.S. backing will blunt any international backlash. But this strategy is breeding profound resentment. Allies are questioning the wisdom of giving Israel a free hand. Even Washington's patience is showing strain as its own credibility erodes alongside the ruins left by Israeli missiles. Joining us now from Paris is Mr. Maher Nicholas Fursley, Director of the EU-ASEAN Center for Strategic Studies, to explore the consequences of Israel's widening war and whether this policy of boundless force has become a strategic failure. Thank you so much, Mr. Fursley, for joining us. And how would you characterize Israel's evolving military strategy since October 7th? Is this still a war against Hamas, or has it become something far larger than that?
I'm delighted to join you today. And what I will say now is going to be, like you said earlier, on a strategic plane. So very cold, very cold, no warm feelings, no sympathy for anyone. Of course, I have no sympathy for Benjamin Netanyahu or the Likud party, but I'm going to criticize them, and I'm also going to criticize those who criticize them, because it's a big mess. It's a big mess, and there's a lot of lies. So on both sides of that terrible war, there's a lot of propaganda and lying.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Explain to me, Mr. Frizzi.
Yeah.
Explain the mess.
Yeah. And speaking of Trump, so Trump is a very unorthodox, non-typical, strange, in a way, Republican politician. And there's another famous Republican politician who was very unorthodox and strange, and his name was Hiram Johnson. And Hiram sounds very Middle Eastern. It's a Lebanese name, but Hiram Johnson was an American senator from California. He was a Republican, and he delivered a famous speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate at the end of World War I. And it's the first modern war where all governments used intensive propaganda machines to lie to their own people, right? And so Hiram Johnson said that truth is the first casualty of war. So the first person to die at the beginning of the war is truth. And it's exactly what's happening now. Of course, if we go to Israel and if we look at the world with Israeli eyes, I think the mistake that Netanyahu is making is not to bomb Qatar, right? In my view, once again, a very cold, rational perspective. Maybe bombing Qatar was good. Maybe bombing the local headquarters of Hamas, blah blah blah, in downtown Doha was smart. So for me, it's not the mistake he made, right?
Explain to me that part. Explain it to me, please.
Another big mistake, and the mistake he made is
so you mean that was a minor mistake, but there is a bigger one?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So people are focusing, Gulf Arabs, Qataris, the UN, right? The United Nations, Europe, they're focusing on that. And once again, to me, it's a minor issue. And it may be on a certain plane, if you look at the world with Israeli eyes, it may be a legitimate target, bombing the Hamas headquarters in Doha. Let's put it aside. There's a bigger mistake that Netanyahu is making.
Okay.
And it's a loss of strategic focus and a loss of the proper time frame of a war. So all confrontations should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right?
And an objective.
If there's no end game, and this is the big problem Israel has, if there is no clearly, if even themselves, right, don't have in their own mind Israeli
What's the objective?
Military planners, what is the end game here? How does the end of the story, the end of the war, how does it look? They don't even know. So of course, when they don't know, they lie, right? Propaganda, and so they're lying. And there's another mistake. The time frame is too long. It's far too long. It's going to have long-term negative consequences on the Israeli economy, on the trust in Israel. And once again, if you like Israel, if you're an Israeli politician, you should not do that. There is a bigger mistake. It's the loss of focus. So in strategy, in military strategy, the key word is focus. So what is the target? What is the objective? So the time frame is wrong, but there's something even more wrong than that long time frame is they don't even know what is the focus, right? So when you wage a war on multiple fronts, 2 fronts, 3 fronts, 5, 10 fronts, and you have no idea of what are the objectives and how the end game looks like, it's a recipe for disaster. And that's exactly where Israel is today. It's diluting its own strategic resources. And one last remark, if I may, I think it has to do with the trauma of October 7, right? So what happened in October 7 destabilized Israel at a cultural, at a deep, it goes beyond politics, and it's much deeper than military strategy. It's cultural. It was a cultural shock. What happened?
Do you think that Israel is trying to show off as a mighty power in the region, trying to send messages to regional players? I'm not sure, like Turkey, Jordan, who are now within the range of potential strikes?
Yes. and it's doing so clumsily. And why clumsily? Back to what I said earlier, being cold, Machiavellian, right? Trump is very cold, Machiavellian, and when he acts smartly, Trump is very efficient.
But the Machiavellian approach is the end justifies the means. We're talking here,
Yes.
what is the end? I mean, we're discussing here, what is the end? What is the objective
exactly.
that we're trying to find justification
Yes.
for from the Israeli point of view,
Exactly.
or the Israelis trying to prove, right?
Exactly. They're acting very clumsily. And the example of that, a few hours after they bombed the Hamas headquarters in downtown Doha, and once again, it may have been a legitimate target, blah, blah, blah. A few hours later, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who dislikes Qatar, who hates Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, a few hours later, he flew to Doha as a show of solidarity.
That's what Mr. Justin Thomas Russell just told me. He's bringing all the Gulf countries closer than ever.
Yes, exactly. So it shows you the lack of focus, because when you're unfocused, when you act in a very brash, aggressive way without thinking of all the consequences, is
it just aggressive way or arrogant way, making use of the endless American support?
Yeah, no. The thing is, maybe you're right. You're putting your finger on one of the wounds. There are many wounds, but one of the many wounds.
Thank you.
it's the Israelis themselves and the Arabs too, right? They perceive that there's an open-ended American support, a blind American support to Israel, which may be true or not, but perceptions are more important than reality, right? So it is perceived like that. It's open-ended. It's like a blank check. So people believe there's a big blank check, and like, when you like a child, but your child is a spoiled child, even when he acts aggressively, if you are a sugar daddy or a sugar mommy, you will tell your child, okay, you've done something wrong, but it's okay, I love you. And so the perception is when Israel acts aggressively, their sugar daddy will tell them, don't do it next time, but it's okay. So
they don't even say don't do it next time.
Yeah. So when the perception is that your sugar daddy is giving you a blank check, then the child acts more and more rashly and aggressively because he has no moral barriers, hudud, bila hudud, right? So
no
when you
limits.
have barriers, you become more and more aggressive. And sadly, once again, it has to do with the trauma of October 7.
Yes.
The fact that the war in Gaza is dragging, there is no clear objective. And so they're making mistakes,
Okay, so what does it mean, Mr. Fairzli, for future negotiations on Gaza or Palestinian statehood? Has diplomacy been irreversibly sidelined now?
Maybe for the short, medium term, the Israelis themselves have burned the bridges, and maybe that's what they wanted. I don't think so. Maybe they wanted to burn the bridges because clearly they have enemies, and the enemies are Turkey and Qatar, who are behind Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, etc. And so when you have enemies like that, you should focus on them with a long-term strategy. It doesn't mean bombing Istanbul or Doha, right? And so what they've done now, they've offered a free check to the Turks and the Qataris, because locally, the neighbors of the Turks and the Qataris, who don't like them very much, now they are really backing them and saying, no, Israel
I get your point. I'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Meher Nicholas Fairzli, for your sharp analysis. Thank you so much. And as Israel's war theater expands, so too does the risk of a region spiraling towards sustained, uncountable conflict. Tonight's discussion exposed a stark truth: Israel's unchecked military aventourism and undermining every pillar of peace and security in the Middle East, striking civilian districts in Doha, widening the battlefield across the region, and dismissing diplomacy are not the actions of a responsible state. They are the hallmarks of strategic hubris. And at Qnews, we always stand unequivocally against these attacks and the impunity that fuels them. Stability cannot be built on missiles and intimidation. It rests on respect for sovereignty, protection of civilians, and adherence to international law. We will continue to hold those in power to account and amplify the voices demanding an end to this reckless path. Good night. Thank you so much for joining us.